webinar series, The Knowledge Lounge, Generation Restoration Dialogues, brought to you by the UNCCD G20 Global Land Initiative. We have designed this webinar series to engage and empower 1,000 young people every month who intend or are involved in addressing critical issues related to land restoration, climate resilience, and sustainability. For our first webinar, we might run short on numbers, but well, what can we say? We have begun. It is a space to share thought-provoking discussions that spark new ways to view challenges and inspire action and change. I am Keely Chauke, and I'm your moderator for the first session of the webinar series. Today, we'll be exploring what land restoration is and why it matters and how it plays a critical role in the global livelihoods. We are honored to be joined by an exceptional panel of speakers. From the Green Generation Initiative in Kenya, we welcome John Kimani, a passionate climate action advocate spearheading landscape restoration and school greening programs. John brings a powerful on-the-ground perspective to today's conversations. Hi, John. How are you?
Hi, I'm well.
Awesome. Secondly, we're joined by John Steib, a young voice in international youth climate policy from COP26 to COP29. A former UNICEF Young Youth Foresight Fellow, he joins us today, amplifying youth voices on the global stage. Hi, Joshua.
Hi, Keely. So glad to see you. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. Lastly, we are joined by Dr. Leimu-Brown, the principal of Linacre College at the University of Oxford, a scholar of plant ecology, sustainable land use with expertise in tropical forest regeneration and biodiversity. Dr. Brown offers an academic and policy-oriented view of land restoration's broader ecological impact. Welcome, gentlemen. Hi, Dr. Nick.
Hi there. Hi there. Lovely to see you all, and a real privilege to be sharing the session with John, Joshua, and yourself, Keely.
Thank you, Doctor. Let us begin by grounding our land restoration session today in community action and grassroots implementation. John, could you please share with us how your work at the Green Generation Initiative contributes to land restoration and how local communities and schools are at the center of your efforts? John?
Yes. Hi, Kelly.
Hi.
Yeah.
You're kicking us off today. Thank you for joining us from Kenya. We appreciate it. Yes, you can begin your presentation, John.
Okay, I would request somebody to help me do the presentation, and then I can start. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Probably, yes. Hi, everyone. My name is John Mbugua from Kenya. I do field operation in the Green Generation Initiative. The Green Generation Initiative is a youth-led organization doing climate actions and advocating for change in Kenya, in Africa, and beyond. We are based in Kenya, and we mainly carry out greening in schools, and that's what mainly I did, the field operations, the aspect of the actual work that happens on the ground. Yes, probably we can go to slide 2. And let me say something. The Green Generation Initiative was started by a global environmental champion called Madam Elizabeth Wathuti. And it focuses on our main thing, the main product that we are known with is the eco projects in schools and farmland. We combine the efforts on monitoring and evaluation, the hands-on environmental education to kids, the young generation, and we bring practical solutions and the ones that are working on the ground, and we implement them in the schools and in the restoration efforts that we carry in the landscape with the communities. And our key focuses are the 3 Ps, the people, the planet, and the prosperity. In the people, that's where we do the resilience work. In the planet, that's where we do the restoration. And in the prosperity, that's where we ensure there is value for money. We ensure that whatever we are doing is not only bringing a livelihood to the people that we are carrying out to, it's also a source of food. Our keen interest as the Green Generation Initiative is fruit seedlings, meaning as we doing restoration in the environment, in the schools and in the community, we are also ensuring that there is food. So ensuring that we combine the resilience aspect and the economic aspect of that. Yes, that is the main bio about the Green Generation Initiative. We can go to slide 3. Our key activities and our key highlights on what we have been able to achieve. Number one, we have been able to train more than 35,000 youths on conservation. We carry out an approach that is very unique. When we are doing community activities, we liaise with the community youths and people who are carrying out restoration, and then we work with them. And we train them, and then we allow them to carry out the activities. For example, when we are doing planting of seedlings and restoration in the communities, we first reach out to the communities that are doing restoration in those areas. We train them, and then we talk with them, and then we work with them to ensure those restorations happen. We have been able to establish fruit orchards and the microforest in more than 312 schools as of now, ensuring we have green spaces and ensuring there is food security. This aspect is going to grow bigger as we continue, because currently we are working on a program that we ensure we go to more than 435 schools in more than 14 counties in Kenya. Those are like regions or states in other countries. This will ensure that we are reaching the scope to the young generation, and we are also increasing the scope of our coverage and the work that we do. In the aspect of the community engagement, we have been able to engage more than 185 farmers, 85,000 farmers. How we do it? We first go to them, talk to them, and look at maybe the community forests that are near them, the rivers that are near them, and every other aspect that is near them. And then we talk to them, and then we give fruit seedlings to them. And as we also encourage them to do restoration in the spaces that are near them. So it's a win-win. They have fruit seedlings and they are conserving the environment that are near them. And through this, we have been able to see a stronger community appreciation for ecosystem services, meaning we have been able to see a mindset shift, in that people now understand it's their own responsibility to take care of the environment. As the Nobel laureate said, that nature is not forgiving. If we don't take care of it, it will not forgive us. So we ensure that we change the mindset so that they can be able to change the spaces they live in. And this work comes with the hands-on of challenges. And one of the challenges that we have been able to encounter is that not everybody appreciates the environmental work. There are people who don't really understand why we should bother about rivers, about forests, about the ecosystem, about the biodiversity. There are people who don't understand. So they don't understand why we have passion for what we do. That is one of the major challenges that we face. That's why our keen focus is on the mindset shift and on training people who can be ambassadors of restoration. Yes, we can proceed. The other aspect is the issue of resources. We have a vision to cover a broader scope, but resources are always limited. Resources are limited, hence we have to work with the means we have to reach the communities that we can be able to reach at the moment. And how we address some of these challenges that we face. Number one is we focus on the mindset, the training. We go to schools, develop some eco-crafts, train them on what they are supposed to do. So we ensure that when we go, the trees will be taken care of, because we are not focused on just planting. We are focused on restoration, on the aspect of resilience, and on the aspect of change that is brought on the actual ground. And then the other thing is we engage the communities, and we ensure they own the projects. We don't come and superimpose things on them. We talk to them and we ask them, how can we best solve this? What are the local programs that have been working on this? And then we implement them together with them, and we collaborate with them. And this ensures that when we go, they don't say this is a GGA project. They own the project. they own the project because they are part of the community. And the other thing that we mainly focus as it's one of the SDGs is the aspect of partnership. We work with like-minded people in the local communities, in the schools, in organizations, and people who have a keen interest on ensuring that we have restored the ecosystem that we are working in. The other aspect which our founder is very keen, and we are also very keen, is advocacy. We ensure that we use the global platforms to advocate for policy changes, to advocate for the decentralization of resources, and to ensure that we have a mindset shift even on the global space, because the global space affects the actual groundwork. And the other aspect is what are needed to scale up some of these works that we do. The first thing that we need to highlight in this webinar is the aspect of access to multilateral processes. Like, we need to have people actually included in the global spaces and in the global forums to amplify their voices. And this is not just the aspect of fulfilling the rules and regulations that are set, but there is the aspect that whatever they say is considered. And that is what we foresee, that if this is done, it can bring a change to our global space. The other aspect is funding and resources. Research in the past has shown that out of the 100% of the resources that are allocated for some of these works that we do, less than 15% reach to the actual people on the ground. So this is something that needs to be taken care of, because if we are losing 85% of the resources on the processes and not the actual work, then it means we are not doing the actual work that we need to do. And then the other thing that can be of assistance to some of these spaces in the Green Generation Initiative, in the work we do, is the aspect of networking the young generation and the leadership with policymakers, with experts, and with people who can impact, who can drive an impact. The other aspect is the role that this policy and advocacy plays. Probably we can go to the next slide as we conclude. When the generation that we are having is involved in restoration on the global space and on the policies, both at the UN, the AU, and all the other platforms, it brings the ground level realities to the decision makers. This means that I can be able to voice the opinion of a kid in a school because I've been on that ground. So when I'm on a global platform, I really understand and I feel after, and I can be able to understand what is needed to be done. This also raises awareness and it educates community and drives innovation. We are very keen on green innovations. The people who are creating scalable, practical climate solution, we partner with them and we visit them, we learn from them, and we establish them in some of our institutions. We have been able to establish vertical gardens in a special school that we are working on, and other solutions that we have seen work. Anything we see on recycling, anything that we see on carbon desertification, we adopt it and we work with partnership to establish it in our communities and in our schools. And the last thing that I would say on that aspect is that involving communities even which are not, their opinions are not considered. We have a restoration program. We work in the coastal regions where we do mangrove restoration with some communities which are not originally from that place. And we have seen when you educate them and you involve them in these programs, they're able to even do it in more community forests and in their homes and in every aspect. And probably the other issue I will talk about is the issue of partnership. And I think I highlighted this, and it's something that needs to be repeated in all these forums. We need to have a decentralized funding. We need to ensure that local youth initiative and all the local organizations that are carrying out restoration in our generation, they receive direct support to scale up impact, because this bureaucracy and these steps and how we lose resources and they don't reach the actual work is what is making the change not to be brought. And then we need to, in the globals, in the COP spaces, we have had an issue where local solutions are asked to have a scientific backing. Yes, we need that for solutions, but if something works and it can be proven to work as a local solution, then we don't need all these processes that question it and ensure it's not implemented on the global space. Probably we can go to the last slide. So this is what I'm talking about, policy inclusion. We ensure that these strategies that ensure sustainability in restoration are not only implemented, but the actual people on the ground are asked about, and there needs to be a participation, not the participation that says youth, young people, and all the other kind of people, but a participation that is well motivated to ensure that whatever they see is listened to. That is the aspect of inclusion of all the communities in the global spaces. And then there needs to be a political goodwill. We have policies and advocacy on all these kind of things, but if there is no political goodwill to implement the restoration efforts, some of them will be sabotaged because our leaders are actually influence some of these things. So we need to have a goodwill in them to ensure that whatever we are advocating for, they also feel and they understand, and they are like, this is what we are supposed to do. And the last thing is on resource allocation. Resources can be limited in supply, but if we allocate practical working local solutions, we will ensure that there is equity, and whatever is working on the ground is funded, and then therefore we ensure that whatever I called in the previous slide are decentralization, to ensure that local solutions that are working in restoration in the communities, the ones we work with in the schools, the ones we work with at the global space, the forums to advocate for policy, the people who are actually matters and people who are actually are in those environments are funded directly. Therefore, we ensure impact is direct, and we ensure that we have a community that is well vested on restoration, and we are able to achieve some of these SDGs we have in the world, and we can be able even to achieve what we have, the Vision 2030 to the Vision 2040, the Vision 2050. Of this vision, we have in the UN bodies and the hosted bodies. We can be able to ensure that the restoration, the landscape restoration, all these efforts, the zero emissions, all these efforts can be achieved through this combined stakeholder effort and the goodwill, the political will, and the mindset and the will to achieve them on the ground. Probably I can have my presentation up to there. Probably we will do a rejoiner as we do the question answer.
Definitely. Thank you, John. That was very inspiring and practical, the work you guys do at the Green Initiative. Definitely. And touching on critical issues such as funding for young entrepreneurs in land restoration. Next, we turn to the global climate policy space. Joshua, you've been on the front lines of youth climate advocacy at major UN conferences. What role does youth activism play in promoting land restoration, and how can intergenerational collaboration help shape a more diverse and climate resilient future? But before Joshua takes the stage, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat or Q&A box that you will see at the top of this Zoom call. Joshua, how are you? You can please take the stage.
Thank you so much, Keely. Yeah, super happy to be here. Thanks again for having me. I've been a climate advocate for like the past couple of years. I started when I was 15, and I kind of ended up in this international space of the COPs. Just for those who haven't heard what like COPs are, these are the annual climate change conferences of the United Nations, where basically all countries come together to decide what to do about climate change and how to combat it. And over the last couple of years, I was part of this, representing young people in those negotiations, in those discussions, because yeah, it's our future that's decided upon and in those spaces. So it's also really important that young people are present there. And today, I want to talk a little bit about like the climate lens of land use, of land restoration, and that all basically started at my very first COP that I attended. That was COP26 in Glasgow. That was in the year 2021, so already a couple of years ago, and it was my first COP. And I remember on the second day already there was a huge euphoria, because there was a statement, there was a publication where more than 100 country leaders, more than 100 countries signed a pledge to stop the deforestation and degradation of forests by 2030. that was a huge success in my eyes. I was just like, finally, this kind of underrepresented topic of deforestation finds a place in those climate change conferences, and I was really ecstatic about it. Over the next couple of years, I kind of learned more about what's going on with deforestation, what's going on with land use, and I realized that our global discussions and our like kind of global where the attention lies in this topic is a little bit misguided, because I think one of the biggest issues is barely addressed, and that's what I want to talk today a little bit about. And that is how our agricultural systems, how our food systems work, and how that basically has a huge impact on land use and on the potential for land restoration. Because we barely talk about the elephant in the room, agricultural systems. At the moment, agriculture is responsible for 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. That's absolutely massive. But in those COPs, in those climate change conferences, it's barely talked about. And especially when it comes to land use and biodiversity loss and land restoration, it's such an important topic that we normally shy away of, because I think it's also a very thorny topic, because it's about how we eat, what we eat, about our daily habits. So that's why I want to just sign with a little bit of scientific data points, just a very quick summary in which situation we are and in which situation we are going to be if we don't change our behaviors, and if we don't change our agricultural systems that we're currently in. So I think land restoration, on one hand, is something that I'll later come back at, but at the same time, we have to discuss about like basically step before, how can we basically halt the craziness that's currently going on, where we basically still deforest at a scale that's absolutely massive. The WWF estimates that 27 football fields of forest are lost every single minute. So 27 football fields, just imagine that's what's cut down all the time, every single minute. And that's just insane, and we have to find a way to stop that. So I will talk a little bit about animal agriculture, because that's the biggest impact that causes deforestation. But just to be clear, when I talk about animal agriculture, it's very much focused on the global north, about factory farming, because the majority of the deforestation, the majority of the animal products that are consumed are in wealthy nations, in nations of the global north, in for example, nations like the US. Also, I'm from Germany. Nations like Germany, they have a really, really high consumption of animal products, which is harmful to our planet. So I'm not talking about indigenous ways of stewardship with the earth. I'm not saying that everyone should become vegans or something. I'm just to set the scene. When I'm talking about this, it's mostly about problems that are caused by the global north and not by the global south. So animal agriculture is at the moment the single largest driver of deforestation. Between 60 to 75% of ongoing deforestation currently in the Amazon rainforest occurs in order to create pasture. So basically the animal feed for cows. 60 to 75% of deforestation just in order to generate pasture, to generate the feed and crops that we can then feed to cows, that we then later eat, especially in countries like the US and in countries of the global north. And this deforestation equals a huge amount of carbon emissions. Just to maybe think about how much deforestation can cause in terms of carbon emission. In Canada in 2023, they had insane wildfires. And the wildfires of Canada in 2023 caused as much CO2 to be released into the atmosphere as the Canadian economy basically causes over 2.5 to 3 years, just through wildfires. So a massive carbon sink that normally stores carbon that then basically releases it. So that's what we basically are talking about. And 83% of the farmland globally is currently used in order for animal products. So 83% of all of the farmland is for animal products, which is highly ineffective if we think about where our calories that we consume and where the protein that we consume actually comes from. So because that basically means that 17% of the land that is not used for animal products, those 17%, they generate 82% of all of the calories that are consumed worldwide. 82% and 63% of all of the proteins that are consumed worldwide. So a very, very small part of this world's fertile land is used in order to basically bear the brunt of the calorie intake of the world and of the protein intake of the world. So the way that we currently allocate land resources is really, really inefficient. And that becomes a problem because our world population increases to rise, and if our current diets continue with business as usual, then this would mean that we would need 119% more edible crops by 2050. I mean, these are, of course, these are just expectations and a prognosis, but we basically need to double the amount of food that we generate, and that's although we are already cutting down forests at the moment in order to create more land to grow crops. So we have to really think about how and where is the food coming off from in the next years if we want to to basically combat that. And to bring in the climate lens again, the Paris Agreement has said we of course we have to basically reduce our emissions, but we also have to remove emissions from the atmosphere. The only chance that we can get to 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees is if we also find ways to remove carbon and greenhouse gas emissions from the atmosphere again. And we talk a lot and we hear a lot, especially also in those settings of COPs. We hear a lot about technological solutions, how to basically suck out carbon out of the atmosphere again. But at the moment, nature-based solutions, so reforestation, for example, is the instrument that has a proven track record of working really well and of having the possibility to get a lot of carbon and CO2 out of the atmosphere. Because some of the carbon that's basically sucked into forests can stay in forests and then also in the soil underneath for hundreds and thousands of years. And with a lot of the technological solutions, they are still unproven and they still need a lot of more innovation in order for them to be feasible and economically viable. So ecosystem restoration is the way that we have to go if we want to take CO2 out of the atmosphere in the future. And just to bring that back to our agriculture, if we shift to a plant-based food production by 2050, so if we only use basically plant-based food by 2050, then we have the potential to, and if we then use all of the agricultural fields that I talked about that's currently used for animal products, if we use that for nature-based solutions, then there are different prognosis and expectations, but then we could sequester between 332 and 547 gigatons of CO2. That's approximately what our world emits in like 10 years. That's how much we could sequester if we actually use all of the land that we're currently using for animal products in order to have nature-based solutions on that. So there's a massive potential two ways, because we can reduce our CO2 emissions by switching our food habits, and because we can use all of the land that's freed up that's currently used for animal products in order to have those nature-based solutions, in order to have those land restorations initiatives that would basically free up the size of Africa if we basically just get rid of the all of the land that's currently used for animal products. So just that was kind of like a short run through the food system that we're currently in, and basically just a couple of numbers, because it's really difficult to understand the size of the problem that we're confronting. And the last thing that I want to wrap up with is a little bit different, because in order to have those land restoration projects at the scale necessary, we need much more political will, and we need much more finances. Just one example, in 2007, Ecuador launched an initiative called the Yasuni Initiative. And what they basically said was, okay, we have one of the most biodiversity dense rainforest, but in this rainforest there's also a lot of oil reserves. So because we are a country that's still developing, we kind of need the revenue from the oil, but we also don't want to cut down our rainforest because we know that we have climate problems. So what they said, I think very awesome idea, is we need funding from the global north, from richer countries, in order to protect the rainforest from all of the revenue that we would lose by not cutting down the rainforest and exploring the oil revenues. And there were estimations that said, okay, they would basically, over the next years, they have a revenue of more than $7 billion US dollar from the oil if they cut down the rainforest. And they said, okay, if we can get half of this from the international community in order to protect our rainforest, then we will not explore those oil fields, then we will not cut down the rainforest. And well, that's what the initiative was, and it was met with nothing as a response from the global north. In total, by 2012, only 200 million US dollars basically were pledged to this initiative instead of the 3.5 billions that would have been needed in order to compensate kind of for the revenue loss of exploring the oil fields. And because the global north didn't give enough money for this project specifically, in 2013 the first parts of the rainforest were cut down in order to explore the oil fields, and also then in 2016 and 2019 the project was enlarged. So that just shows that we have the capability, we have the solutions, we even have the political will in some countries, but especially the global north has to step up in terms of financing capacities in order to make sure that the nature-based solutions that we have can be really deployed at the scale that we need. So just to basically summarize, in order to prevent future degradation of land, future deforestation, we need to rethink our agricultural systems and shift away from animal agriculture. We can use that space that's currently used for animal agriculture in order to use it for nature-based solutions. And we need especially the political will and the financing power from the global north in order to make all of that happen. So yeah, with that, thank you so much, and looking forward to the discussion afterwards.
Thank you, Joshua. Your insights are a reminder how critical youth are in this journey. Now we shift to academia and global development. Dr. Leimu-Brown, could you speak to the ecological science behind land restoration and why restoring degraded land is vital for biodiversity, particularly in tropical regions?
Thank you, Keely. And thank you also to John and Joshua for some really inspiring talks there. John, that was an amazing description of your project that will chime really strongly with what I'm going to describe, which is really just to try and pinpoint some of the important scientific and ethical principles behind land restoration. I'm going to share my presentation with you just so that it gives me something to talk to. And I'm just going to, there we go. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about is, first of all, what is land restoration, which I guess many of you will think is far too obvious a question for us to be tackling. But there are one or two important issues that it's important for anybody who's considering land restoration to resolve in order to make sure that what they're doing has the sort of value that John's project has and has the lasting impact. There are, I'm afraid, far too many restoration projects around the globe which are not so well designed or so well supported, particularly by local communities, and that very often undermines their success. And I'm going to begin with a concept which I'm sure is very, very familiar to this particular audience, but to people of my generation is something of a novelty, and that's the issue of ecosystem services. Now, just very briefly, an ecosystem service is part of an ecosystem's normal functioning. It's essentially what ecosystems do that are of value to a human population. So there are lots of processes that happen in ecosystems which are not of value to humans. So for instance, let me think of one. The production of methane in peat swamps, for example, that's just a natural ecosystem process, but it's not one that has much value to humans. In fact, it probably contributes to global warming, just a natural process. But these are, on this diagram here, those natural ecosystem services that actually have value to us as humans. And I believe that when we are considering ecosystem restoration, what we should really be talking about is the restoration of these useful services, not the restoration of an ecosystem. And I think very often we get trapped into thinking about putting back original nature, putting back the wilderness, about putting back ecosystems that look as though they have never had the fingerprint of a single human on them ever. Yeah. when really what we should be thinking about is creating useful ecosystems that are valued by their human populations, by the communities that own them and manage them, so that they are keen to protect them into the future. And that's exactly what you heard in John's descriptions of the projects that he was implementing. Now, I think that probably there are 5 existential crises which are afflicting the globe at the moment. And you will undoubtedly have heard of, the biodiversity crisis and climate change that Josh spoke about so compellingly right now. But other environmental crises that are equally important, that have an equally devastating impact on human well-being, include the scarcity of clean water, the impacts of pollution, which is a growing problem globally. You may well be aware of the problem of plastic pollution. And then finally, land degradation. Land degradation is the sort of the little sister of all of these big 5, the one that's rarely ever spoken about, but perhaps, certainly in my book, probably one of the most important, because it has the most immediate impact on ecosystem services. And as Josh said, when he talked about food systems, it's really one of the ways in which, because agriculture is one of the principal causes of land degradation, it's really one of the most important ways in which we have an impact on global well-being. Now, what I've got here is a cartoon. So there are no numbers on this, and please just treat it as a sketch rather than as anything backed up by proper scientific data. What you have on the y-axis is really the benefits that human society gains from an ecosystem. And you can see that if you're at the extreme left-hand side, at the beginning of my graph, which essentially follows a pattern over time, that ecosystem services provide a lot of benefits to human community. And early on, when human communities are small or low technology or low density, then generally we have a pretty minimal socioeconomic impact. And so we're within what is termed the safe and just operating space for ecosystem services. But as time progresses and communities grow and technology advances and our capacity for doing damage increases, gradually our capacity or our demands for using resources outrun the capacity of the ecosystem to supply them. And that results in long-term and permanent damage to the ecosystem, which results in a decline in the amount of valuable ecosystem services the system can provide. And you can see that we will go from one stable state at the extreme left-hand side, where ecosystem services are bountiful and we get a lot of stuff for free from the natural environment, over to the right-hand side of my graph, where we're getting virtually nothing from the ecosystem, and all of that will have to be provided through human endeavor at great cost and obviously at even greater environmental damage. Now, one of the things that we need to understand before we get to the point of restoration, and this is perhaps a bone of contention that I have with the whole concept of restoration, is it presupposes that damage is inevitable. And I think one of the things that Josh was talking about is that really all of our efforts should be directed at what is perhaps the most important point of the conservation hierarchy, which is avoiding damaging things in the first place. Yeah, if we can do that, hopefully we make the whole need for restoration completely unnecessary. So what I would like perhaps to bang on about today, and perhaps for you to take away as the important take-home message, is the most important thing is not to restore, but to avoid the need to restore in the first place. And if we can do that, then actually our problem is largely solved. Well, I acknowledge that actually that's never going to be entirely practical. Even with a largely plant-based food system, we are going to cause some environmental change. And therefore, what we need to think about cleverly, and perhaps with the use of new technology, scientific advances in agriculture, making agriculture more sustainable, more resilient, is to minimize our impact on ecosystems. And I also acknowledge that there is a big legacy of damaged land out there in the world. Probably about a third of all land globally having suffered some sort of degradation. And therefore, inevitably, there is a need for restoring that legacy land that already is badly damaged. And then finally, and this is an area I'm sure that many of you will have strong views about, there is the opportunity to offset. And this is something that's being discussed quite a lot in the West at the moment, perhaps in the context most frequently of carbon sequestration, where an institution or a country is emitting large amounts of carbon dioxide, and therefore, in order to salve its conscience and to make it feel good about what it's doing, and so that it doesn't need to change its practice, what it does is to offset those carbon emissions somewhere else in the globe. So carbon is sequestered in forests in Costa Rica to offset emissions from power stations here in the UK. Yeah, and you can do the same with land degradation as well. We can think about ways in which we might be restoring ecosystems in one place in order to compensate for loss elsewhere. And that really encourages me to put up this top tip. Watch out whenever you get involved in the restoration discussion that very often people will promise to restore in order to dodge their obligations to avoid or minimize damage in the first place. And don't you allow them to get away with using restoration as an excuse for causing damage. Yeah, that so often happens. There's a very great example here at the moment in Oxford, where there's a major infrastructure scheme that's going ahead. And one of the justifications or the excuses for allowing it to cause damage to some very important ecosystems is that, well, we can recreate those elsewhere. So in my book, avoid is the most important strategy. So you shouldn't even ever be thinking about restoration if you can avoid damage in the first place. Okay, let's turn our attention back to restoring and let's see what restoration can do. And you can see this is the same graph again. And those 4 levels in the conservation hierarchy have result in different impacts on ecosystem service provision. If you are able to avoid damage, you will see that ecosystems continue to supply a healthy total of socioeconomic benefits in perpetuity, and that should be in the long term highly sustainable. But you can see as we work our way down that conservation hierarchy through minimizing our impacts to restoring them and then finally renewing them, that's creating new habitats. You can see that these both are the ways to rescue a collapse in ecosystem services and to bring them back to some level of importance to communities. Okay, well, I apologize for probably what is a very green audience for putting up this photograph of what I think is probably one of the most beautiful cars in the world. And I have to admit that even though I'm a passionate conservationist and ecologist, I would love to have this particular Ferrari restored to absolutely mint condition. This is probably even better condition than when it drove out of the showroom back in the late 1960s. But why I wanted to show you this was because of the implications of that term restoration, of returning something to its former original or undamaged condition. Yeah, we often associate restoration with that idea of putting it back to its original condition. And what I want to urge you to consider is not thinking about the ecosystem as being as the focus for our restoration, but to focus instead on ecosystem services. It's really important that we don't get trapped into this idea of trying to recreate original nature. And much, much more important that we think about what is really important and useful to human societies. And that's where really my 6 steps in any good restoration project come from, with step number 1 being perhaps the shortest, agree restoration goals, but actually the most difficult, because how you do that not only is difficult, but it's actually the most important step in any restoration project. And you will see that John had been working there in partnership with his community, consulting deeply and understanding what it was that the community needed from a restoration project in order that it gave value to them and ensured the long-term sustainability of the project. So many restoration projects aim to recreate nature, which is of little value to local people, little value to local communities, and although it provides some aesthetic ecosystem services, doesn't provide much else. So don't get trapped into thinking about recreating nature. Sit down with the stakeholders in any project and consider what really matters to them and what services they value from their ecosystem. The next step is one where perhaps I hope you might need a biologist, because what you really need to do identify here is what's gone wrong, what's happened to the ecosystem that prevents natural recovery. So one of the things that I've learned in 40 years of studying ecosystems is that they are very good at bouncing back from impacts. And really, we only need to intervene and start to restore where the damage that we have inflicted is so great that they've lost that capacity to bounce back. And I would say here, very often, local people will be the real key to understanding what's gone wrong. And if I've learned anything over the past 40 years about restoration projects, is that a top trick for a scientist like me is not to come in with technology to try to solve restoration problems, but actually just to go and ask local people. And usually they will give you the insights that enable you to work out what you need to do to start undoing the damage in a really effective way. So that will allow you to come up with a plan that will identify cost effective, and we'll come back to why that's important, practical and time limited, but most importantly, socially appropriate interventions, things that are really needed by the people who are living in and using those ecosystems. Cost effective, because actually, as John mentioned in relation to some of the projects he's doing, resourcing, financing a project is critical for making sure that it's effective. And it's very often the thing that undermines so many restoration projects. Step number 4, really, you need to, before you begin a restoration project like this, think about the funding, particularly for long-term support. Yeah. And then step number 5, think very carefully about who it is you're going to get to do the work. Yeah, because once again, this is critical to the success of a project, and getting in a bunch of international consultants with big yellow machines to come and do the restoration for you, often using very high-tech solutions, is not the best way of doing this in so many cases. What you should be doing is empowering those institutions or communities that are best able to act. And that's very often the local community, the people who are living there. And then the final step, really, this is something which is very dear to my heart as an academic. It's so important to monitor the success of your project and to learn lessons from what went well and what didn't go well. And very frequently you will see, particularly in the conservation literature, accounts of restoration projects, but it's very, very difficult to find out what happened 10 years down the line. Did it work? Did the ecosystem recover to a level at which it could actually provide valuable ecosystem services for its community? Or did something else come in and undermine it? Because it's really, really important we learn those lessons if we're going to improve our practice. And we certainly do need to improve our practice globally. So Keely, that's me done a very whirlwind tour of what land restoration is all about. And I hope it's raised a number of issues which my colleagues on this panel and those listening will have comments about.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. That was very insightful and powerful. For now, we'll take questions. And the first question is for Josh. The first question is for Josh. Josh, the question says, how can we create and ensure a safe transition system, particularly in agri-sector?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because the reason why I think animal agriculture is not really represented in discussions at COPs and also in national politics is because it's so difficult to shift our habits. It's so difficult to shift away from what we're used to, maybe from childhood memories that we associate with a certain type of food, from traditional dishes and whatever. It's super difficult. But I don't think that's actually the main issue. I think the main issue is not about having animal products in our food. I think the problem is the scale to which we have it in our agricultural systems, and especially the scale at which also governments kind of subsidize it. So especially in the global north, you can see that a lot of animal products are subsidized by governments, which make it animal products cheaper than for example vegan alternatives. In Germany, for example, the tax rate for normal for like animal milk is lower than for soy milk or for almond milk for basically sustainable alternatives. So I think for transition to work, there are several pillars that have to work. At the moment, basically all of the people who are involved, they accuse each other of having to do the first steps. The consumers say, oh, but if the animal products are so cheap, I want shift. The like the companies say, oh, but there's so much demand, so we won't do anything else. And the government says, oh, but everyone consumes them, so we will continue to subsidize. And I think just someone has to do the first step. And I think that there are a couple of really great initiatives out there to try to basically make that first step. Naming one example, I'm sure Dr. Leimu-Brown is very has heard of it before because it's an English initiative. It's called Veganuary. It's basically a challenge to basically start into the new year and say, okay, in January I just want to try out veganism, and I just want to try how it is to eat a plant-based diet. And that has worked splendidly because at the time when it started in the UK, more than 1 million people signed up in the first year of the iteration, and that led supermarkets to basically have like special Veganuary products to say we have a lot of like vegan products that people will buy because so many people try it out, and because so many people bought it, those products stayed in the supermarkets, and more people consumed the vegan alternatives, the plant-based alternatives, and not the animal products that harm our planet. So I think those are initiatives how a transition could work. But I do think that we have to ask ourselves, especially people in the global north, do we need the third burger in a week, or maybe it should remain a special occasion for like our birthday or something, and also to start with ourselves while also holding like companies and also the government accountable for the unsustainable practices that they kind of incentivize.
Thank you, Joshua. And 2 questions to John. John, in Maasai land in Kenya is the most degraded land. Do you have restoration projects in that area?
Sorry, you can do the question again.
Okay, Maasai land in Kenya is the most degraded land. Do you have restoration projects in that area?
Yes, we have a program that we are running in Kenya for 14 counties, and the schools run in 3 terms. So in this second term, we are doing 14 counties, and we have a plan that in the other terms we are going to reach out to sub-county, especially on the upper side of the Mala. So that is on the pipeline, mainly on the schools program. And we have a program that is learning. We adopted a forest in Ololua Forest. There's a forest in Kenya called Ololua. We have adopted some acres of land and we are doing restoration there. We also have a program in Gong. It's one of the biggest urban forests in town. And we're also doing restoration there. So we have a lot in pipeline for both for the community and our keen focus for the grading of schools. So that is in the pipeline, and it's something we are working on in the long run. So it will come. If we do 14, and we have already done like 7 counties, meaning we will have done like half of Kenya. So meaning in the near future, as we scale up, we will have reached out to most of them. But we have done schools in the past in some of those MAR counties. So we have done schools in the past. So, and we intend to do more in the future.
Thank you. And the second question is, does your organization include vulnerable people, such as people with disabilities or other groups in Kenya in your work?
Yeah, we are very keen on inclusivity. And one of the things that we usually focus on is when we are doing the schools program, we have schools in our pipeline that have special needs. So it's a very keen interest that we have, and we are very keen to ensure that we empower even those people that have special needs. And another thing that I want us to note is that there's a school that we like adopted called Treeside. It's in one of the counties in Kenya, the headquarters of Kenya in Nairobi. And it's a special school. And we have planted trees in the past. We have donated food in the past. And currently we are doing for them vertical gardens. And we have also set up programs for them for chicken, poultry farming. And it's something that we are very passionate about. And even the schools that are in the pipeline, the 435 schools that we are doing, some of them are special needs schools. So it's something we usually consider, and it's something we are very keen in, because we believe that nobody should be left out in this restoration journey. Yeah.
Amazing. Dr. Nick, is there any standard metric system used to measure rehabilitated lands? How can we standardize the reporting or progress of recovery?
Really good question, Keely. I don't know who's asked that, but I suspect it's somebody who's probably already involved with restoration, because actually those metrics for measuring success are really a challenge. And they're perhaps least challenging at a very, very small spatial scale. So, you know, restoring a little pocket forest in an urban park is quite easy to measure changes in air temperature, or changes in air quality, or the number of people using the park and things like that. But when it really becomes a challenge is when you start to scale up to the sorts of scales which we need to be working on globally, and then having good metrics which actually measure those changes is very difficult. We're not there yet, but I think there are a number of techniques, usually remote sensing based. So looking at you know, changes in land cover and changes in the loss of sediment through river erosion and so on, that actually are helpful metrics pointing us in the right direction. I would say the most important way to measure success, however, is to return to what you agreed with the restoration goals to start with. And if the restoration goals were to have an ecosystem which provides a healthy diet to all children in that catchment area, there immediately is your metric. So what I would say is metrics need to be specific to the project, and they need to be tied very closely to the objectives of the project that were defined right at the start. I put my hand up, Keely, because I wanted just to add in on the question that John was talking about Maasai lands in Kenya. That's going to be a real challenge for John and his team, because we know that actually those areas of Kenya are becoming increasingly arid as a result of climate change. And climate change is one of the big drivers, along with agriculture, of land degradation. So even if there were no ongoing problems of human caused degradation, there is going to be a quite significant decline in vegetation cover in those areas, reflecting that change in the climate. So we need John and his team to get going quickly, and they need to be resourced properly to do that.
Amazing. And then 2 last questions to all our panelists. What is your experience of encouraging cultural or mindset shift through hearts and mindsets? You know, stories and conversations rather than statistics. And the second question is, in terms of communicating genuine success stories and distinguishing these from the mainstream greenwash, what would you say is the best way that we in the audience here can support this? Any takers?
Okay.
John, you go first.
Okay, I think one of the things that we are very keen in, apart from the monitoring, the statistics, the numbers, what is lost and something, in terms of the culture shift, is ensuring that people own up to the environment, and they understand that we are part of this ecosystem, we are part of what we do, and whatever is done, whether by us or somebody else, affects us directly. There's a ripple effect that affects us directly and indirectly. And that's why we are very keen on the mindset and making them understand that the choices have consequences, and what we do, nature responds in that effect. If you do something, the 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise will affect us all. And if the world is destroyed, we will all not have a home. So we have a very keen interest on not just the numbers and everything, but making people own up to these restoration efforts and make them understand that whatever they are doing is for their own good. We may have the resilience aspect where there may be some income on this restoration effort, but our keen interest is that we are taking care of where we live, and if where we live is conducive for all of us, we'll be able to flow smoothly. So that is what we focus in. Of course, the numbers and the statistics and the biodata are important, but we are keen on people owning up to the project, owning up to the mistakes that are happening. We don't have to say that the Global North did what or the Global South did what, but we have to be accountable, all of us, at the level that we are in, so that we can be able to change the world that we are living in. So that was the first question. And the other aspect, we have a motivation that motivates us and what we are doing. It's the aspect that we can be able to see tangible solutions on the ground. When we look around and we go to the kids, to young people, you see some of the projects we have done in schools, some of them are already eating the fruits. When you see that, you're motivated to do more and see that nature is responding positively, and we are able to do the work that is of benefit to all of us. Probably that would be maybe something that I would love to say.
Thank you. Joshua?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in on the question about basically how we can change our ways of communicating about the climate crisis, also about communicating about land restoration. And I think it's one of the biggest challenges of our time, because at the moment I feel like climate change is a little bit, the story of climate change is a little bit told that half of the people are either in despair, and the other half is kind of in denial. So either they're just like, okay, there's no chance that I can help or contribute anything to solve this, or they're basically shielding off all of the things that are going on, because it's just so much to take in. And I think we really have to find different ways to communicate about it. And I think every person has to ask themselves, how can I communicate about it to bring a different angle to the conversation? Because at the moment, most angles are kind of the same angle of hearing those really bad news about what's going on in the world. Without learning much about actually what's being done in order to confront those issues. So one angle that I have found for myself to communicate differently is use my passion for piano to basically combine it with I call it piano poetry performance, where I basically talk about social issues in a way that I rhyme it and add it to like a piano topic, and it really works because people listen differently if I just give a talk. And I'm very guilty about using statistics and numbers in this little talk here, instead of just using that, also using a different medium to basically transport the same message. So I think we all have to ask ourselves, how can we find different angles to talk about the same things, and how can we do that in a way that really respects the other person where they are coming from.
Okay, once again, thank you to our speakers, John, Joshua, and Dr. Leimu-Brown, and to all of you guys for joining us. As we wrap up, we are reminded that land restoration is not just a technical solution, it's a human mission. From classrooms in Kenya to policy halls in Europe and forest research in Oxford, restoration begins with intention and thrives on collaboration. Don't forget, the journey of the Generation Restoration Dialogues continues every month. On next month, on the 13th of June. Be sure to follow our channels and register for the next webinar series. Thank you guys for joining us.